All right, here we are. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. Let me extend a welcome to you if this is your first time here, and a warm thank you to all those returning. What's going on? What are you doing? Like right now. I know I've said this before, but I often have this thing happen right when I push record, which is I imagine what you're doing right now. It's almost like a movie montage that runs through my head for a quick moment. Like, are you the person who is up late at night listening to this before you go to sleep? Or are you the person who is driving in your car on the way to work? Or maybe you're the person who is at the gym on the treadmill or sitting at your breakfast table. I just imagine that there's all these infinite possibilities about who you are and where you are and what you're doing right now. And there's one thing in common in all of those scenarios. You are listening to this. It's a beautiful thing. I'm very grateful to you. Thank you for being here. And I don't know about you, but it seems to me like whatever luster the holidays into the new year may have had seems to have kind of already worn off. Feels like we're right back into the grind again. Although I try not to think of it as a grind. I try to feel like I can move with fluidity, but it certainly feels like a grind. And there's a lot of good things on the table for this coming year, but also seems to me challenges and uncertainties. So it's a lot if you look at it all big, like one picture. In fact, if I try to think of it all as all the stuff that is going to happen or things that I'm going to have to do or hurdles I'm going to have to clear this year, then it feels daunting and impossible and paralyzing. But if I think of that expression, what is it, like 1 foot at a time, right? Just what am I doing today? What's the next thing? Take whatever hits and curves as they come, right? We carry on. What else are we going to do? So I certainly hope that you're doing okay and keeping your chin up, as they say. I've got a fantastic conversation to share with you. My guest is Hamish Hendry. And I don't know if you know who Hamish is. I would say in the UK, and I would say in the Ashtanga world more generally, he's quite a well-known figure. Although very understated. He's maintained a very low profile over the years, and I'd heard all these stories about him. and when I finally got a chance to meet him, he really wasn't what I had worked up in my mind. In fact, it was very easy to talk to him, and we connected, and it was a really wonderful conversation that touches on a lot of, I think, pressing threads for folks in the yoga world. So I was really grateful to have this chance to speak with him, and I'm pleased that I get to share it with you today. Real quick before we get to that, though, I want to give a shout out to David Singleton and Mary Elise Adams Mercado. Shout out to you, David and Mary Elise, for being podcast premium subscribers and supporting the show. I really appreciate it. If you're newer around here and you were not aware, the most recent 52 episodes are always part of the public feed, but we also have a podcast premium subscription where you can access the full archives and just help us keep the show going. Because as I said, stuff can feel like a grind, and having a little support out there makes a huge difference. So it's choose your rate. You cancel at any time. If you don't have money and you want to listen to an old episode, all you have to do is email us and we definitely will hook you up. But if you can give even just a little something, it makes a difference. We're grateful to everybody who does it. To learn more about becoming a podcast premium subscriber or find out about all my other stuff, I've got ongoing live stream classes and a weekly meeting of teachers that you're welcome to drop in on. If you want to come hang out with me outside of listening to this show, there's opportunities to do that. You can find everything on offer at jbrownyoga.com. All right, I think that's fine. I will touch base with you on the other side, but let's go ahead and listen to this conversation that I had with Hamish Hendry. Hello?
Hey, Jay.
Hi, Hamish.
You can hear me all right?
I can hear you. Can you hear me okay?
Very well, thank you very much.
Oh, well, pleasure to meet you. I know we've had a few email exchanges, but we've never met before, and I'm glad to have this moment with you.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you so much.
Well, it's funny. Your name has come up a few times on this show, come up many times in conversations off the show. And it's my impression that you tend to be a perhaps somewhat reserved person. You don't necessarily do this kind of stuff. And I have a feeling that it took a little bit of cajoling from some mutual friends to get you to do it. So I really appreciate you deciding to join me here. It really is a pleasure. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you for hosting me. It's very kind of you.
And I don't know if you listen to the show, just for you to know, I am already recording, and I'd like to think of us as having just begun.
Cool.
All right.
So, as we just begun, is it okay to do a little chant, and then we can, I like to sort of set the scene and then chat away.
Oh gosh, I love that idea. Hamish, please take it away. I'm happy to sit and have chant with you. Go ahead. What were you thinking of chanting? You know
Sahana Bhavatu, I take it?
I know it some, yes.
Okay, so should we start with an Om and then go from there?
Sounds good to me, sir. Please, I take your lead.
Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahana Punaktu Saviryam Karavavai Tejasvina Vaditamastu Ma Vitvishavai Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Okay, let's party.
I love it. I appreciate you doing that, because that's actually been something that's become more important to me in my teaching than it ever had before. Like, I always have chanted at the beginning and the end of classes. That's always the way it was when I came to yoga classes back in the early 90s.
Yeah.
But I do think over the years, there was a little bit of a shift away from certain elements of practice that were maybe like less accessible or less marketable. And I've always done the chanting, but I've kind of, I don't know, I felt insecure about it for a time, but more recently, like in the last 2 or 3 years, it's becoming in bigger part. So I really like that you wanted to start like that today.
It seems more like not controversial, but like, I guess, when we both started yoga, it was something that were like, ooh, that's a bit weird and a bit strange. And then it became more, I'm not going to say mainstream, but becomes, we both become more comfortable with it. And then other people, our students become more comfortable with it. It becomes a normal part of our practice, I guess, really. And that gives it more magic, really, I suppose.
Well, I think there's something very unique about the experience of doing chanting. I had Krishna Das on the show, and I talked about an experience I had with him where it was the first time, because he and I both had Jewish in our family, and then came to yoga, and then seeing that example of somebody chanting, and then actually having a very transformative experience of kind of feeling insecure about chanting. Like you said, it felt like some weird thing, but at a certain point, kind of giving over to it, and then something happened like, wow,
Because of course, in from Jewish tradition, there's a whole shed load of chanting, from Shabbat to when people die, it's constant, huh?
Yeah, it's in there. And I guess also, I don't know, there's something for me that happens with chanting that is very of spirit. And that's something I've been talking about a lot recently with this show, because yoga did take a turn towards like biomechanics and scientific lenses for a while. But my early experiences, my early transformative experiences were with doing things like chanting, and that accesses something in us.
That's for you. That was your practice with it or that was your experience. So that when you first started yoga, there was chanting, and then it became more, like you said, was it biomechanic? You used the word, or more?
Yeah, like people started really wanting to like legitimize as it got mainstreamed.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
So it becomes more about like research studies or something.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really pleased. There's been some a few research studies. I read something relatively recently, the last few years. I think it was done in Holland, where they got a bunch of people to do Ashtanga, and they got a bunch of people to do cycling, and they were doing measuring. And I'm not a scientist by a long chalk. They did a bunch of brain scanning and chemical data or whatever. I mean, it's available online. I had to ask my dad, who is a scientist, what it all meant. And he said, he explained it all to me, and how Ashtangis use less glucose in their brain. What that means, I have no idea. But basically, he said, to put it long, to cut a long story short, yoga is good for you, like you didn't know.
You didn't need the research study to tell you that, though, did you?
Exactly. But hey, I'm glad that people are doing research. I suppose what I find difficult with yoga, and I suppose it's just the society we live in, the world we live in, is the commercialization of it all.
Mm.
That's I mean, we live in a world where we can't escape that, but it becomes more commercial in lots of ways.
Yeah, and there's certainly like a line to ride there when you want to be an authentic practitioner or teacher and potentially make a living at it, which we can get to. Maybe that's another conversation. I want to go back first just for a moment to the chanting, because I have had a number of conversations where at some point there was discussion around like Westerners doing Sanskrit chanting and cultural appropriation, and I came to it in the early 90s, and I'm very inspired by Desikachar teachings, and Desikachar was always like, take this and make it your own, make it relevant to your culture, So I think that's one of the reasons why I might have, gotten self-conscious about it. But I've certainly had enough people, even Indian teachers on this show, expressing views in support of Westerners doing Sanskrit chanting. And I guess just for you, like, what is the chanting for you? Do you think of chanting as prayer, as meditation? Like, how do you think of chanting in your practice? And do you think of that in any kind of more religious way?
I suppose for me, chanting is sometimes it's a bit like a tattoo. I have a few tattoos, as some people who know me, and tattoos can be therapeutic or they can be armor. And chanting in that way, for me, can be both. Sometimes it's therapeutic, and sometimes I feel it's protective. Sometimes it is. Sometimes I do need to connect with whatever you want to call as divine, whether it's the force, whatever, whether it's Krishna, Shiva, however you want to say. And sometimes chanting is my way of connecting. Sometimes it's asana. Sometimes it's looking at a tree.
I'm so happy to hear you say that. That's very cool because I've been looking at a lot of trees these days.
It's so beautiful in autumn.
And I didn't think of that in the same way that I do now that I did in the past. Like I kind of thought of yoga practice as asana, pranayama, meditation, and it wasn't as integrated into my nature walks or whatever.
And you're in Japan now, am I right?
No, I'm in Pennsylvania.
Oh, why did I think you were in Japan?
I don't know. I have spent time in Japan over the years, but I never lived there.
Oh, okay. My mistake. Okay, I said Pennsylvania, where you've got some beautiful autumn leaves now, I take it?
Yes. Well, they've mostly now fallen, but yes, we get lots of beautiful colors here. I moved to Pennsylvania from New York City in 2017, specifically to be around more raw nature.
Yeah. So, talking of leaves, it's really interesting because I like to sort of walk. Currently I'm doing a lot more running in nature, but walking in nature and walking my dog. And, we're, like you say, the falling leaves, I'm very captivated by them at the moment in the way that to me, they represent our lives. We have this bud of little tiny bud, and it springs out and it becomes green and beautiful, and then it becomes brown and colors and falls off, just like our mind in that sense, and then is blown off into the gutter or the dirt or whatever. But we have to go with the wind. We have to go with Vayu. We're trying to go against the wind. The leaves just get blown by just like our lives get blown by the wind, and we have to take that. So that was my little sort of nature insight recently, I guess.
Yeah, I've really just been thinking a lot about even this word of animism and like the trees as beings and different rhythms in the environment.
Did you ever read Carlos Castaneda?
Yes, I have, and I heard you in the only other interview I could find of you talk about that book being something that was significant in your life.
Yeah, that was. I think I was much younger, and my mind was open to all sorts of whatever potentials, and maybe there might have been some things that have been helping to open my mind as well. Mm-hmm. That whole idea that trees were our closest relative, which I've obviously, from a biological point of view is total crap, but, the fact I've always felt there's some connection there. So I liked reading that and I like quoting it. And yeah, it's important to me.
Me too. And that actually goes to something, but I want to come back to it. It has to do with the fact that in my understanding, yoga is rooted and teaches like a consciousness or energy-based reality. And it does seem like even within the yoga world, can be like even more materialistic worldviews held, which is very interesting to me. And like I said, that's something I think we could talk about. But first I want to find how you came to just now when you expressed that idea about leaves and trees and even your experience of chanting. I'm always curious how breathing and moving practices lead to that for people.
I see.
There's so many different types of approaches, and you are, in my mind, a little bit of one of the last of a dying breed in a way. Maybe I'm out of the loop because I'm not in the Ashtanga community, but sure. There are not a lot of traditional Mysore style practice shalas around anymore that I know of.
I think you're right. I think the pandemic put a short, sharp end to a lot of what was going on for Mysore practices as in studios where it happens. It's from a financial point of view, it's thank God. Unfortunately, we're in a good place, but for a lot of Mysore teachers, it's been a big struggle, and I think also for Mysore teachers, there's a massive emotional commitment along with a time and energy and compassion commitment. And it's a lot to ask from somebody. And I think people start and maybe they do it for some time and then they burn out very quickly. Obviously, it's the most pleasurable path for me, but it's for some people, it's a difficult path. And like I say, the pandemic changed the way. It's changed a lot of lives, and yoga teaching was one of those things, I guess. Really, as a old school dying breed, I think was the thing. I suppose. Yeah, I'm just carrying on teaching what works for me, really, and I hope it works for other people. I suppose my main thing for yoga and how that fits in with other practices that you wouldn't normally sort of associate with an Ashtanga practice, as in chanting, meditation, reading the Bhagavad Gita, etc., is that what we're doing is a breath practice with a bunch of awkward asana chucked in with it. That's my current view.
That's interesting. Was it always that way?
Probably
did you
not.
always see it as primarily more about pranayama than the sequence?
Yeah, I think breath, because we have a separate pranayama practice.
Right, like outside of the ujjayi and the sequence, you mean?
Yes, but a breathing practice. You want to call it pranayama, that's fine by me, I don't care. But a breathing practice with a bunch of asana. I suspect when I first started, when I was like 18, 19, it was, this was just like hard physical stuff, and I loved it, and it was big buzz. I think from a very early age, I've always had this sort of personal mantra, which is, I could be wrong. As simple as that. And I might get to whatever age I die at and go, you know what? I should have stuck with the drinking and the cussing and the cheating, but hey, I would have ended up as a politician or something, So I'm really happy with where I am at the moment, but I could always be wrong.
I mean, that's such an interesting thing to hear you say. I really appreciate that mantra, because it's not just a joke. It's a way of like keeping you from holding dogma in a way. Like to
100%.
Say that's that. 100%. I've talked about that on the show a bunch of times whenever we talked about like hierarchical power structures and stuff and where things have gone wrong. We always talk about people not being able to be wrong or to be open to like changing their views being the issue. So the idea of like, I could be wrong always being an underlying held belief kind of helps alleviate some of those issues, I think. I for me personally, I think so. I think other people obviously have their own personal philosophy. And like you say, dogma is a dogma dogs us, doesn't it? It's a difficult thing to overcome. And I think that idea of losing face is very difficult for some people, and a bit like just being able to say sorry and apologize. I was one of the things that I was talking about recently with some friends was, the modern expression, my bad. You have that in America, I take it? Yeah, we got that here, sure. My bad,
so when I first heard it, I was like, what is this? Why can't people say, well, I've made a mistake or I'm wrong? And I realized what it is. It's a way of saying, I'm sorry, without the emotional difficulties of having to say I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's like taking responsibility without having to apologize or something.
Exactly. You just say, my bad. My bad.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't, unfortunately, I can't see Putin saying, oh, my bad. I got it wrong, but you never know.
No. Well, I think that's true. And I guess it's interesting to me also because, as I mentioned, I do think of you as a last of a dying breed. And I think it also goes to what you said about the difficulties in terms of sustainability of something like a Mysore room. And a lot of people I know who have been able to kind of hold it down for as long as you have. And again, there's not many left.
No.
I do think part of that is because we did kind of come into yoga at a certain time, and sometimes like the timing of when a person came into it and started doing what they're doing has sometimes been like there was a sweet spot or a golden time where certain people came into it right before it hit the mainstream, and we kind of rode the wave.
I never thought about that, but yeah, you're probably right. Like that's sort of like be the right place at the right time sort of thing. A little bit.
I mean, there's more to it than just that, because there was plenty of people who came to it at that time who are still not doing it now. So it's not just that, but I don't know if people coming into yoga now could do what we did. It's not even possible. There's not even the possibility necessarily for people to organically grow what you've grown in the same kind of way.
I mean, I would say I have a few friends who have opened Mysore programs, much later than I have in the last sort of like 10 years, I guess, or even the last 5 years. And I think their attitude is what, makes a difference. The idea of service, I think, is really an important part of being a Mysore teacher. You're not as in like we're in the service industry, but we're providing a service to yogis. And also that whole like karma yoga aspect of that doing service is really important. So I think some of my friends who are Mysore teachers, that they have that attitude, and consequently, because they have that attitude, their yoga classes are doing really well. So if you think you have a good attitude, you encourage a good attitude within your students as well.
Oh, I think that's very true. That's been some of the issue in terms of yoga teachers becoming a career, and people like feeling like part of their job is to do social media rather than like be of service to individuals, like 6 people showing up or whatever.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that's true, that there's an energy to how someone holds it. I mean, again, it's also a different time. And I think I'm glad to hear that. I do think that it's true. I wouldn't say that it's not possible at all anymore, but it has to come from some deep place within a person. I would agree.
Sure.
Otherwise, it's not going to.
Yeah. And I think if you've been practicing for a long time before you start teaching, you've built up some energy. I think that makes a difference too.
Yeah. And I guess I also am thinking about what you said about your mantra and not holding dogma. And honestly, I have to say that I sometimes have associated Ashtanga yoga practice as being more dogmatic than other approaches. I don't know that that's necessarily true, because within any of these schools, there's these individuals and like personalities and different approaches, and things became more standardized over the years. But when you came into things, as I read, it was like in the late 80s, if I read, like you first started coming into, was that right?
Yeah, 86.
Right. And I read that your kind of first teachers were Derek Ireland and Radha Worrell. Is that right?
That's right, yeah.
And I also heard it was kind of like I spoke to Danny Paradise some years back, and he talked about seeing some like demonstration in Hawaii and getting hooked. And you kind of had the same story. Is that what happened? Like, how did you end up at a Ashtanga yoga demonstration in 1986?
So I was like 19. I'd been doing a little bit of yoga before from some books and my local, like some small community center, nothing special, but I started at 17 and loved it. I enjoyed yoga in general, but knew nothing. I've been working in a hostel for homeless people for quite some time. I had some money to burn, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to go on holiday. And so I went on my first holiday on my own to Greece, to this place called, on an island called Skiros in northern Greece. And they had like this alternative holiday center where I booked into. And Derek and Radha were there. I didn't know anything. I just saw that advertised they were doing yoga. I didn't know anything about them. They did this demonstration, and I was just like, whoa, there's no way I can do that. And I was sat next to a guy called Satish Kumar. I don't know if you know who Satish Kumar is.
I do. He like walked around the world or something for peace, if I'm remembering. Is that right?
Back in the 60s, yeah. He was with no money. He left India with no money. Well, amazing guy. He's written a bunch of books. He lives down in Devon. I have connected with him a couple of times since. But anyway, basically, he said to me, go on, give it a try. You're a young man. Like, so if it wasn't for him, seriously, I would.
Did you know who he was when he was sitting next to you?
No, no idea.
Yeah.
It was just like some Indian dude.
Yeah.
So, you know, like when you're young, you're impressionable, but also incredibly ignorant. And probably
or that was a message from beyond.
Self-belief or whatever. So anyway, yeah, that's basically how I started, really. And you know, I just remember the first lesson, finishing the first lesson, and like being, whoa, just being, I'd be honest, I'd be like, I was high as a kite and thinking, this is amazing.
I feel good.
And, loving it, really.
Well, let me ask you about those first lessons then, because I have this impression of Ashtanga being taught differently back then than when I first discovered it, like in the 90s, even like a decade late, or like a decade later. And my impression is that it might have been more like, oh, someone comes and then like the first day they just have you do like some breaths of forward and back up in like a standing forward bend, you know, and then the next day you come back, like you built the primary series up over time rather than like trying to do full primary on your first day. And I'm curious, how did it go for you? How did you get introduced to the Ashtanga?
Exactly like you say. We did Surya Namaskar A and B the first day, and then the next day we did the same, and then some standing postures. So it was a 2-week thing. So basically, we did the whole primary series over 2 weeks. Some people did the whole thing. Some people just had it halfway. But we built it up, and you know what? That's exactly how we still teach. That's how that hasn't changed. It seems to work very well. I guess some people don't like it and they don't come back, and some people are very happy with that system. You know, there's 3 aspects of teaching. There's the content, as in, you know, the series, the Bhagavad Gita, the philosophy, whatever, all that content that you have to keep as a teacher relearning or re-remembering. There's your students, if you're fortunate enough to have some, learning more about them every single day, getting to know them. And thirdly, like how you get that content, that information to your students. And that's a sort of, even though, you know, I feel, you know, we know a lot, there's always more to learn.
And that's lovely. And it's interesting what you say in terms of still teaching in that more traditional way. I think that's why like Mysore rooms are sort of like a unique entity in the sense that like at other centers, you would have whatever. It used to be a 90-minute class, but now it's probably a 60-minute class on the schedule. And so if somebody like pays whatever $15 for their drop-in class, and then you're like, after the first 15, 20 minutes, you're like, you're done for the day. See you tomorrow.
People don't like it. But the thing is, we have a different interesting pay system.
I noticed, yeah.
Well, originally, I mean, we used to do men and women paid different. So men paid more for for a variety of reasons. Historically, men have always earned more, and women take some do, some don't have take some days off for their period. So originally we'd done women paid less. I think actually on our website there's our menstrual survey. Actually, you might be interested to point that out to listeners. It's worth checking out.
I mean, just for people who don't know, who might be listening, I think probably they would know, but that's part of the Ashtanga system. Like you don't practice when you have your period or on moon days too, right?
Yeah. Although if you check out our menstrual survey, we did ask that question: do you practice on when you have your period? Yeah. And some people do, some people don't. Some people do sometimes. It varies.
Right.
We don't ask that question. We don't. We say this is what is suggested. Totally up to you.
Right.
Anyway, now we run a system where basically people pay what they can afford. It's a trust-based system because I feel, that's the way I'd like things to be. And I think it's really important that, all relationships are built on trust. You trust me, I trust you, we trust the shopkeeper, you trust your, I was going to say you trust your politicians, but maybe that's going a bit far.
Yeah, let's not go there.
All relationships built on levels of trust. Should we go there? Let's go levels of trust.
Fair.
And the more trust we can engender between people within our relationships, the better. So giving students the option to show their trust, I think is much giving. They then have the power. I'm saying, look, here's the options. You have the power to choose how much you want to pay me, how much you value yoga.
I mean, that's really lovely. I have to say that is that's an ethos that, again, I haven't necessarily associated with the Ashtanga system in the past. Only because I don't mean to, don't get me wrong. All my Ashtanga friends out there, don't get me wrong. I say that only in the sense that it had, and maybe it's not true as much now, a very it still does a tradition and a hierarchy. And I know that you went and studied with Pattabhi Jois.
Sure.
So the ethos of, when I hear people tell stories about going to see Pattabhi Jois and them paying for their training and stuff, it's not quite the same ethos that you're describing.
No, so, Sharat has always been very kind to us and has always said, when I've asked him questions about what I should do, he might have given me suggestions, but he's always backed it up with it's your Shala. You run it how you want to run it. So I think that I really respect that. It's interesting, that sort of whole power and hierarchy thing, because it's quite funny, really, because we either, and not just in the yoga world, in all aspects, we either give power or power is taken from us, shall we say? And if we give power to people, it's a trust and a respect thing. But it also brings into that question, how do people enforce power? There's no, I do remember asking Pattabhi Jois years and years ago, I think when the internet first started, or early on, saying, there's all these people teaching Ashtanga who've never been to Mysore, they don't really teach the sequence, this is, in my young, when I was young and slightly bold and carefree, what can we do? And Pattabhi Jois said, there's nothing I can do. And this is very true. There's, if you have some authority, you need a police force to back it up. And thank God there's no yoga police. I think people would like there to be, but
yes, people keep suggesting there should be, and I keep saying no. So I'm in agreement.
Exactly,
with you.
Exactly. How are you going to enforce it anyway? Do you know what I mean? Thank God we're living in places where we're allowed to do yoga, because from what I understand, some of my students who've come from other countries have said it's more difficult to teach yoga in those countries.
Yeah, I guess there, particularly when it comes to Ashtanga, there were like, the distinction was like authorized or not authorized. And what that has meant over the years has seemingly kind of changed some. I don't know, because again, I was never really in the community, but you were like technically an early authorized teacher from like whatever, 2001. Were you one of the folks who got like the tap on the forehead, or how did your authorization process go?
Okay, so I sort of skipped authorization because when I first went to Mysore in 95, there was like, I don't know, a few people, maybe a dozen people who were certified. And like, it was this sort of mythical people, you know, Annie Pace, I can't remember who else.
And that was just because Patabi Joyce told them they were certified. Is that right?
I don't know. I have no idea. Tim Miller, Richard Friedman. So you knew these names, and occasionally you might be in Mysore and they were in Mysore with you. And then you chatted to them and you're like, just regular folk, 2 arms, 2 legs.
Yeah, Richard's very cool. Richard's a great guy.
Yeah, exactly. Regular folk. And there was no authorization, but there was this certificate thing. And then I can't exactly remember how authorization came along. I think partly through John Scott sort of helped instigate that with Patabi Joyce. And there was like, well, you've got to do it. You've got to be to Mysore for 3 times. You know, there were, it sort of, I was going to say it happened organically, but I don't even know how it exactly happened. Anyway, by the time authorization came around, you know, there was the certification was still a thing, and yeah. So,
was there any way to learn like what the certificate process was? Like, was there like some kind of curriculum or something that everybody did that gave them the certificate, or how did people get certified?
No, I think it was basically, you know, Patabi said, how many years you come? And you said, I've been coming 10 years, or, you know, you've been, how many times you've been? And it's go, you take this letter, you get copy. So you take somebody else's letter that somehow had been, and then you took it to some guy who would type out with your name, you know, your father's name, all this stuff. And then it got printed out, you know. It was a bit of a convoluted sort of thing. And then you paid some cash. And then you got a piece of paper. And then you felt amazing for a short amount of time. And, you know, you realize, I guess, does the paper have value? And yes, it does, but no, it doesn't. You know, because it's only as much value as people give it, really.
Or what you can back up, like.
Yeah.
Like, can you, because there's something behind that certificate, like when they go into the practice room with you. I guess, did you feel like you needed to be certified or authorized before you opened a shala?
That's a good question. I didn't need to be. I was, I guess. So although I had been teaching a little bit before up in Scotland, by the time I'd moved down to London, I already had my certificate. So
and that was in what I read 1999. You moved to London, is that right?
Yeah.
And did you? When you moved to London, you said you already had your certificate. Did you start teaching? Like, how long before you opened the shala?
Oh, so John Scott was teaching in London before me, and John and I have been friends for a long time. Since we were both living in Greece, and he wanted to move out of London with his family, and I was living in Edinburgh at the time in Scotland, and he said, "Do you want to come and take it over? I'll sell you my business." We arranged some details, and everything just fell into place. I'd fallen in love with somebody who lived in London. Scotland wasn't working for me. John was moving out.
And he was going to hand you a yoga center.
There we go.
Yeah. And I know you, like many other folks, after opening the shala or having the shala, having John give it to you like that, you did make like annual meccas back to Mysore, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. What was your relationship to Pattabhi Jois and to going to Mysore every year? What was it for you?
That's a good question. I suppose it's always been it was an interesting relationship because completely different culture, vast age difference, a language barrier. So the few conversations we had were poignant and some of them being quite memorable. Some of them would be very light-hearted. Some people called him a guru. I've always found that a difficult concept. It's not a concept we were brought up with. It's a very Indian concept. So as a teacher, he definitely did. He definitely, his method has given me so much, for which I'm eternally thankful, really. I guess that's. Does that answer your question?
To some degree, I guess. Did you, when you say some people call him the guru, it sounds like you weren't calling him a guru, but did you?
Well, we used the term Guruji because that was the term I guess he preferred to be called, and it's just it tripped off the tongue a lot easier than Pattabhi Jois, shall we say?
Well, I guess my question around it is that that could be seen as a certain formality that you're respecting, and other formalities would be like the touching of the feet. Did you do that? And when you did that, what did that mean to you? If you didn't think of him as a guru, what was the touching of the feet?
Just another, just a cultural thing, I guess. Formality. I think some people found that very disturbing. It's a very normal thing to do to elders, regardless of whether they're a teacher or not. Young people touch their grandparents' feet. It's I guess people find that difficult because it's the whole concept of bowing down. Right. And, suffering is there because of attachment, from what I understand, and that attachment to our ego. So I guess the touching.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.